the Big Bang would still be such an unlikely event that other things, which are also very unlikely, are still much more likely to have happened than the Big Bang, and some of these are absurd. You see, even if a cosmic fluctuation had created our universe, which again it didn't, but we're ignoring this for the moment, the Big Bang model says that mathematically, the early universe would have been in an extremely improbable state, and so, such a fluctuation would also be extremely improbable. It turns out that mathematically, it would be a lot simpler if instead of our entire universe popping into existence, if the cosmic fluctuation only had to make our galaxy. Makes sense, right? In fact, it would be even simpler if the fluctuation didn't have to make our entire galaxy, but only our solar system. And it would be even simpler still if the fluctuation didn't have to make our entire solar system, but only the Earth. And it would be simplest of all if the fluctuation didn't have to make the entire Earth, but it only had to make one small thing, you. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute. Yes, a tiny fluctuation might be mathematically simpler, but if we're thinking like secular cosmologists, we still need the fluctuation to explain everything else too, because the Earth exists, and our solar system exists, and the Milky Way galaxy exists, and so do all the other galaxies. But how do you know everything else exists? You think you perceive all these things with your senses. But what if they're all illusions? What if the universe isn't real? What if it turns out that the fluctuation didn't actually make the entire universe? What if it only made your brain, which popped into existence with false memories and false perceptions of a universe around itself? A brain that's just floating in the void, thinking there's a universe, but there isn't because it's all an illusion. Now you might be thinking that this is one of the silliest ideas you've ever heard, and I would agree with you. But remember, we're thinking like secular cosmologists for a moment. Secular cosmologists have to believe that cosmic fluctuations can make things pop into existence. But according to the mathematics of their models, it's infinitely more likely for a single brain to pop into existence than for the Big Bang to have caused a baby universe to pop into existence. Here's how an article in the New York Times described this problem. It could be the weirdest and most embarrassing prediction in the history of cosmology, if not science. If true, it would mean that you yourself reading this article are more likely to be some momentary fluctuation in a field of matter and energy out in space than a person with a real past born through billions of years of evolution in an orderly star-spangled cosmos. Your memories and the world you think you see around you are illusions. This bizarre picture is the outcome of a recent series of calculations that take some of the bedrock theories and discoveries of modern cosmology to the limit. The basic problem is that it's hard for nature to make a whole universe. It's much easier to make fragments of one, like planets, yourself may be in a spacesuit, or even, in the most absurd and troubling example, a naked brain floating in space. Nature tends to do what is easiest from the standpoint of energy and probability. And so these fragments, in particular the brains, would appear far more frequently than real full-fledged universes, or than us, or they might be us. Alan Guth, a cosmologist at MIT, who by the way is the inventor of inflation theory and is a rock star among cosmologists, who agrees this overabundance is absurd, pointed out that some calculations result in an infinite number of free-floating brains for every normal brain, making it, quote, infinitely unlikely for us to be normal brains, unquote. Cosmologists call this the Boltzmann brain problem, named after the physicist Ludwig Boltzmann. Basically, according to secular cosmology, it's far more likely for us to be disembodied brains floating in space than for the universe itself to be real. As two cosmologists wrote, "It is very surprising that we find the universe around us in such a low entropy state. In fact, the logical conclusion of this line of reasoning is utterly solipsistic. The most likely fluctuation consistent with everything you know is simply your brain, complete with memories, fluctuating briefly out of chaos and then immediately equilibrating back into chaos again. This is sometimes called the Boltzmann's brain paradox." Now sometimes people get confused about the Boltzmann brain paradox because they think the paradox is about size. They think that according to the Boltzmann brain problem, a brain would be easier to make from a fluctuation because it's smaller than the universe is. Actually, that's not what the paradox is about. In fact, the Big Bang model says that the early universe would have been much tinier than a brain anyway. The paradox comes from mathematical probability. Even if you're a secular cosmologist who believes that a universe can pop into existence from nothing, The Big Bang model is still so mathematically improbable that a brain popping into existence from nothing is far more probable. Notice I'm not talking about this, a brain floating in our universe. But this, there is no universe. The cosmos is empty other than the brains. There are no galaxies, no stars, no planets, no sun, no Earth, just brains. In fact, cosmologists can't even be sure that there's more than one brain. You might be the only one. Maybe everything you think you see in the world around you, everybody else that you think you know, are all illusions. You're not really watching this video because this video doesn't exist. Even though you think you're watching it, the input you're getting from your senses is an illusion. And even though you think you have memories of watching it up until this point, those memories are actually false because your brain just popped into existence a few seconds ago. In fact, your entire life, from growing up as a child until now, didn't happen either because all your memories are false. Your brain just happened to pop into existence with all the molecules arranged in such a way that it included all these false memories built into it. Oh, and by the way, you aren't going to live long because your brain doesn't actually have a body to sustain it. So you'll die soon, and then your brain will dissolve back into the thermodynamic soup that you originally fluctuated from. Again, this might sound ridiculous. Well, that's because it is. But that's what the secular cosmological models say. In fact, cosmologists have had the Boltzmann brain problem in one form or another for a long time. And they have written lots of articles in the scientific literature trying to solve this problem and trying to escape the menace of the Boltzmann brains for the Big Bang model. But despite their efforts, the problem has actually gotten worse instead of better. Cosmologists have realized that eternal inflation, dark energy, and the multiverse all lead directly to Boltzmann brains. As long as any one of these things remains part of the Big Bang model, and they're all essential pieces of it, then the Big Bang model says we're infinitely more likely to be Boltzmann brains than normal people. As these physicists wrote, a typical observer in the multiverse is a Boltzmann brain. In the eternally inflating vacua, observers are infinitely more likely to be Boltzmann brains than honest folk like ourselves. Now let me be clear here. I'm not saying that cosmologists believe that we're Boltzmann brains. They don't because the idea is clearly absurd. But they're being inconsistent because that's what their model says. The whole situation has become so ridiculous that some scientists are complaining about it. As one wrote, modern cosmologists have a favorite default theory of the universe, labeled lambda CDM, where lambda stands for the cosmological constant, which refers to dark energy, and CDM for cold dark matter. In other words, lambda CDM is just a complicated nickname for today's version of the Big Bang model. Now back to the quote. What we're pointing out is that lambda CDM, the current leading candidate for an accurate description of the cosmos, can't be right all by itself. It has a Boltzmann brain problem, and is therefore cognitively unstable and unacceptable as a physical theory. So what does all this mean? The Big Bang theory, when taken to its logical conclusion, means we're probably not real people. We're probably just Boltzmann brains. Remember, it's infinitely unlikely for us to be normal brains. This means that the universe we see is an illusion. It doesn't really exist. And since a universe which doesn't exist never had a beginning, this means there was no Big Bang. In other words, the Big Bang model ultimately says that the Big Bang is infinitely unlikely to have happened. And that means that the Big Bang model has self-destructed because it's self-refuting. The Big Bang model disproves itself.